Okay, so starting off today's Pac-12 preview show, I'm going to be giving you guys the team that I am actually going to predict to win the Pac-12. And this may be a surprise to a lot of people, but I think UCLA is going to win the Pac-12 this season. And last season was very up and down for the UCLA Bruins. And it really starts off when 2 seasons ago, UCLA actually decided to fire Steve Alford. He was actually the head coach of the Bruins who brought in Lonzo Ball. He brought in TJ Leaf, and he was a guy that really brought in a lot of talent to UCLA. And he made a couple NCAA tournaments, made a couple Sweet 16s, but ultimately Steve Alford wasn't getting the job done as the head coach of the Bruins. And they decided to bring in Mick Cronin, who used to be the head coach of the Cincinnati Bearcats. And I do think he is a really good basketball coach, and he did an incredible job at Cincinnati, turning them into one of the more consistent teams each and every year around the country. But I was just very curious to see if Mick Cronin going to UCLA would work, because UCLA's basketball coaching search kind of reminded me of Tennessee's football coaching search when they had so many different candidates, and historically it's a great program, but I don't know, they just didn't have the national relevance over the last 5-6 years. Plus UCLA is a really tough job, and that was a big reason why not a lot of people wanted to be the head coach of the UCLA Bruins, right? Like your Chris Beards, guys like that. So they ultimately decided to bring in Mick Cronin, and my thing was that even though I always thought Mick Cronin was a really good basketball coach, UCLA is a school that likes to bring in really highly ranked recruits. It's in LA, and I just didn't know if Mick Cronin could really adapt to this kind of setting. And it's funny because early during last season, it went really rough for UCLA. They lost at home to Hofstra, who is a very good team. They won their conference, but it's Hofstra. You're UCLA and you're playing at Pauley Pavilion. You should be beating them. They got crushed by BYU. They lose by 13 to Michigan State, whatever. But then they lose by 14 to Notre Dame, who wasn't very good. They lose to UNC, and then this was the bad one. They lose at home to Cal State Fullerton, which was the last game of their non-conference season, and that got them to 7-6. Then during Pac-12 play, they lose 3 out of their first 4, including at Washington State and then at home to USC and Stanford. And then all of a sudden, the Bruins ended their Pac-12 season great. They beat Cal at home. They go to Oregon State and win. They lose to Oregon on the road, whatever. So, still not great vibes right now. But then they beat Colorado at home. They beat Utah at home. They lose to Arizona State on the road. And then look at this. At Arizona, win. Washington State at home, win. Washington at home, win. At Utah, win. At Colorado, win. Do you guys realize how hard it is to sweep the mountain road trip in the Pac-12? And Mick Cronin was able to do that during his first year of the head coach of the Bruins. There are not many other coaches in college basketball that could do that, let alone during their first year as the head coach of the Bruins. And then they end their season beating Arizona State at home, beating Arizona at home, and then losing on a crazy buzzer beater by Jonah Matthews to USC in the Galen Center. And UCLA was playing phenomenal when the season shut down last year. And I do think that they were going to make the NCAA tournament. And when you're a school that during the non-conference portion of your schedule that loses to Hofstra at home and loses to Cal State Fullerton at home, I don't think you guys realize just how big of a hole you're putting yourself in when you lose those 2 games. And the fact that Mick Cronin had the UCLA Bruins in really good position to make the tournament after those 2 losses, that tells me all I need to know. That I believe in this UCLA Bruin team. And here's the other thing. I've heard a lot of people comparing this UCLA team to this year's Texas team and how last year both of them did not play well early, and then all of a sudden you turn around and on Selection Sunday they could have both been in the NCAA tournament easily. But I'm going to tell you this. UCLA is a significantly better basketball team right now than Texas. Because number one, look at the expectations. I understand it was UCLA, but Mick Cronin was not expected to have UCLA in the top 25 during his first season in Westwood. I think all the fans wanted to see is just improvement. And I understand UCLA, their fans can be a little bit nuts sometimes with their expectations. But if you looked at UCLA's roster and you would have said last season going into the year that the Bruins would be a tournament team, I think any Bruin fan would have signed up for that. And I think with that being said and the way last season ended, UCLA definitely does have some positive momentum going into this season. You compare them to Texas, there's a big difference going on the road to Colorado, going on the road to Utah, going on the road to Arizona and winning those games, and then compare that to Texas when they beat Oklahoma State and TCU and Kansas State. That's a big difference to me, and UCLA brings everyone back from last year's squad as well, including Tiger Campbell, the point guard who, right before his freshman season, suffered a bad injury, and I was really impressed with how he looked last year and how he was really able to lead this UCLA Bruin team. They also bring back Jaime Jacquez, one of the best glue guys in the country, and I do believe that UCLA with Jacquez and when Mick Cronin inserted him into the starting lineup, that's ultimately when the UCLA Bruins started playing their best basketball of the season last year. If you remember, Jacquez hit the big buzzer beater in their win over Arizona State, and I think him coming back, the 6'7" sophomore, even though you look at his stats, he only averaged 9 points per game, 4.5 rebounds per game. I'm telling you, Jaime Jacquez is going to be one of the more important players to this UCLA team because I really like the way he's able to stretch the floor and shoot given his size. But the big guy that UCLA will be bringing back is Chris Smith. And Chris Smith is a guy that was phenomenal down the stretch for the UCLA Bruins last year. He was very 50-50 on whether to come back and play for the Bruins or whether to play in the NBA. But last year, he was the Pac-12's most improved player, and I was really happy to see him develop into a natural lead scorer for a really good basketball team. And he got so much better all of last season that I think this year he's going to get even better. And I think I'm confident that he's going to improve even more. And I do think that he's good enough to be the best player on a team that wins the Pac-12, especially when you surround him with a really good coach like Mick Cronin and just guys that do everything well. You look at UCLA's roster, right? And the stars aren't going to, stand out to you. They have very talented players, but Tiger Campbell, he's a little point guard, averaged 8 and 5 last year. He's good, but I don't think he's making an All-American team. David Singleton is a really good shooter. Hopefully he'll be able to stay healthy this year. Same with Johnny Juzang. I think bringing him in from the University of Kentucky could be a move that helps the Bruins going forward. And they have a guy in Jacquez who's a good glue guy. Jalen Hill and Cody Riley could really rebound. Jake Hyman, the 6'6" sophomore, he's one of the better shooters in college basketball, along with Jules Bernard, who he's a guy that I think has a lot of potential if he could just find his way onto the court. I understand UCLA lost the commitment of Daishen Nix, but ultimately, I don't think that's going to be a move that kills them. I think Tiger Campbell is good enough to lead the Bruins as their starting point guard, and I'm confident in UCLA this season. I'm confident in Mick Cronin as one of the better coaches in college basketball, and I'm really buying stock in UCLA.